Okay, at sabayan natin ang tahol ng aso ng ating kapitbahay. Basahin natin. Under pa rin ito ng political and international law. Nandito na tayo sa ating topic at 12, the local governments. So, letter A, principles of local autonomy. Under the Philippine Constitution, it shall be the policy of the state that the territorial and political subdivisions of the state shall enjoy genuine and meaningful local autonomy to enable them to attain their fullest development as self-reliant communities and make them more effective partners in the attainment of national goals. So, letter B, under local governments. Pag-usapan natin ang autonomous regions and their relationship to the national government. Under the organic laws of the autonomous regions, the area of the autonomous regions shall remain an integral and inseparable part of the national territory of the Republic of the Philippines as defined by the Constitution and existing laws. The people of the autonomous region shall uphold the Constitution as the fundamental law of the land and unequivocally owe allegiance and fidelity to Republic of the Philippines. So, ang sistema sa autonomous regions, the province or city shall remit 70% to the regional government. Ayan yung parang pinakapinuno ng autonomous region. Local government, yun. The regional government, yan, takes out its share. And then yung matitira, i-remit nila sa national government on a monthly basis. So, ang flow ng pera nila, province or city shall remit 70% of their earnings to the regional government. Tapos, yung 30% nun, siyempre para sa province or city yun. Yung regional government, kukunin nila yung share nila doon. Yung matitira, i-remit nila sa national government on a monthly basis. So, ito na. Local government units. Letter C, under local governments. Ano ba yung powers niya? Discuss natin. Powers. Letter A, police power. The local chief executive shall have operational supervision and control over the police force, fire protection unit, jail management personnel. So, ano naman yung general welfare clause? Ang ginagamit yan sa mga local government units. Sabi niya, every local government unit shall exercise the powers expressly granted, those necessarily implied therefrom, as well as powers necessary, appropriate, or incidental for its efficient and effective governance, and those which are essential to the promotion of the general welfare. Power of eminent domain ng mga LGUs. So, the local government units have no inherent power of eminent domain. Local government units can exercise such power only when expressly authorized by the legislature. By virtue of the Local Government Code, Congress conferred upon LGUs the power to expropriate. The exercise by local government units of the power of eminent domain is not absolute. It is subject to statutory requirements. So, basahin natin. Under Section 19 of the Local Government Code, eminent domain. A local government unit may, through its chief executive and acting pursuant to an ordinance, exercise the power of eminent domain for public use or purpose or welfare for the benefit of the poor and the landless. However, it may not be exercised unless a valid and definite offer has been previously made to the owner and such offer was accepted. So, local government units may immediately take possession of the property upon the filing of the expropriation proceedings and upon making a deposit of at least 15% of the fair market value of the property. So, ang lagi ko naaalala sa power of eminent domain ng local government ay yung merong mga informal settlers, tapos pinaraanan sila sa Davao ni Pangulong Duterte. Inalok ni Pangulong Duterte ang isang private landowner. Ayun, tapos tinanggap. So, ayun. Doon na siguro nagkaroon ng expropriation proceedings at nabigyan ng lugar yung mga landless, mga informal settlers. Letter C, taxing power ng mga local government units. Under the Local Government Code, each local government unit shall exercise its power to create its own sources of revenue and to levy taxes, fees, and charges subject to the provisions herein consistent with the basic policy of local autonomy. Such taxes, fees, and charges shall accrue exclusively. Such taxes, fees, and charges shall accrue exclusively to the local government units. Fundamental principles ng kanilang taxation power. Letter A, taxation shall be uniform in each local government unit. Letter B, taxes, fees, charges, and other impositions shall be equitable and based as far as practicable on the taxpayer's ability to pay. Shall be levied and collected only for public purposes. It should not be unjust, excessive, oppressive, or confiscatory, and not be contrary to law, public policy, national economy, or in restraint of trade. Letter C ng fundamental principles, the collection of local taxes, fees, charges, and other impositions shall in no case be let to any private person. Letter D, the revenue collected pursuant to the provisions of this code shall inure solely to the benefit of and be subject to disposition by the local government unit levying the tax, fee, charge, or other imposition unless otherwise specifically provided herein. And letter E, each LGU shall, as far as practicable, evolve a progressive system of taxation. Section 132 ng Local Government Code, Local Taxing Authority, the power to impose a tax, fee, or charge or to generate revenue under this code shall be exercised by the sanggunian of the local government unit concerned through an appropriate ordinance. So yung delegated powers ng legislature natin, yung delegated powers nila sa local government units through the Local Government Code, yung lawmaking body rin ang doon ipinahiram din, which is yung sanggunian, yung power to impose a fee, a tax, or a charge through an appropriate ordinance. Section 133, common limitations on the taxing powers of the LGUs shall not extend to income tax. Hindi sila pwede manguha ng income tax. Documentary stamp, tax on estates, inheritance, gifts, legacies, acquisitions, mortis, cosa, customs duties, wharfage, tonnage dues, excise tax, percentage, VAT, taxes on premiums on insurance, taxes on premiums on insurance, taxes on registration of motor vehicles, except license or permits of tricycles. Yun lang ang pwede nila. License and permits of tricycles. Taxes, fees, or charges of any kind of the national government. So lahat ng kinukuha ng national government, hindi nila pwedeng kuhanan. Yun yung mga taxes na binanggit natin. Letter D. Ayan. Under the power pa rin to ng local government units. Yung closure and opening of roads. So under the Local Government Code, a local government unit may, pursuant to an ordinance, permanently or temporarily close or open any local road, alley, park, or square falling within its jurisdiction, provided, however, that in case of permanent closure, such ordinance must be approved by at least 2/3 of all the members of Sanggunian, and when necessary, an adequate substitute for the public facility that is subject to closure is provided. Property permanently closed may properly be conveyed. Any national or local road, alley, park, or square may be temporarily closed during an emergency, fiesta, celebrations, public rallies, agricultural and industrial fairs, etc. Any municipality, city, or barangay may, by duly enacted ordinance, temporarily close and regulate the use of any local street, road, or any public place for Sunday, yung mga flea markets, night markets, yung mga ganyan. Letter E, legislative power. So ano ang requisites ng valid ordinance? So under the jurisprudence, the requisites for valid ordinance are: number 1, must not contravene the Constitution or any statute. Number 2, must not be unfair or oppressive. Number 3, must not be partial or discriminatory. Number 4, must not prohibit but may regulate trade. Number 5, must be general and consistent with public policy. And number 6, must not be unreasonable. Ano naman yung local initiative and referendum? Ayan, no? A referendum of initiative on an ordinance passed by the municipality shall be deemed validly initiated if the petition therefore is signed by at least 10% of the registered voters in the municipality, of which every barangay is represented by at least 3% of the registered voters therein. Yung barangay resolution or ordinance naman, through local initiative and referendum, kailangan signed by at least 10% of the registered voters of the barangay. Letter F, corporate powers ng local government units under Section 15 Local Government Code. Yan. Every local government unit created or recognized under this code is body, politic, and corporate endowed with powers to be exercised by it in conformity with law. As such, it shall exercise powers. It shall exercise powers by a political subdivision of the national government and as a corporate entity representing the inhabitants of its territory. Punta tayo sa letter G, under pa rin ng Local Government Code, Ultra Vires Act. Di ba ang literal na definition ng ultra vires? Beyond, outside, in excess of. Yan. Under the jurisprudence, an act which is outside of the municipality's jurisdiction is considered, mali pa. Abay, binabasa ko mali. Ulitin natin. Ultra vires acts under the jurisprudence, an act attended only by an irregularity but remains within the municipality's power is considered as an ultra vires act subject to ratification and or validation. So, meron lang irregularity pero within pa rin ng power ng municipality. It is considered an ultra vires act subject to ratification and or validation. It is different from a void ultra vires act, which is an act outside of the municipality's jurisdiction or in excess of the municipality's powers. Yeah. Magtungo naman tayo rito sa liability of government units under Section 24 of the Local Government Code. Local government units and their officials are not exempt from liability for death or injury to persons or damage to property. So tayo sa number 3, under pa rin ito ng local government units. Settlement of boundary disputes. Naalala ko lagi dito yung boundary dispute ng Makati at saka Taguig. So under the rule on settlement of boundary disputes, there is a boundary dispute when a portion or the whole of the territorial area of a local government unit is claimed by 2 or more LGUs. Yan. Boundary disputes between or among local government units, as much as possible, be settled amicably. Under the Local Government Code, the respective legislative councils of the contending local government units have jurisdiction over their boundary disputes. So yung sanggunian daw shall decide within 60 days from referral, may elevate the decision of the sanggunian to the proper regional trial court concerned. The regional trial court shall decide the appeal within 1 year from the filing thereof. Yan. So number 4, vacancies and succession under the COMELEC rules governing vacancies and succession, section 44. Permanent vacancies in the offices of the governor, vice governor, mayor, and vice mayor. Letter A, if a permanent vacancy occurs in the office of the governor or mayor, the vice governor or vice mayor, kung mayor ang nabakante, concerned shall become the governor or mayor as the case may be. If all the 4 positions are vacant, the highest ranking sangguniang member ang papalit, or in the case of his permanent inability, the second highest ranking sangguniang panlalawigan or sangguniang panglungsod shall be governor or mayor as the case may be. Letter B, barangay captain. Nagkaroon ng permanent vacancy. So the highest ranking sangguniang barangay or in his permanent inability, the second highest ranking sangguniang barangay. In case of tie among highest ranking, magkakaroon ng, it shall be settled by drawlats. Successors shall serve only the unexpired term. Yun naman ang nakalagay sa Constitution halos sa lahat eh. Successors shall serve only the unexpired term. Section 45, permanent vacancies in the sanggunian, number 1, shall be filled by the President through his executive secretary in the case of sangguniang panlalawigan. Yan, pag may vacancy sa sangguniang panlalawigan, sangguniang panglungsod of highly urbanized cities and independent component cities. So, President ang mag-fill ng vacancy pag sangguniang panlalawigan, panglungsod of highly urbanized cities. Si Governor naman ang mag-fill up ng vacancy in case of a vacancy sa sangguniang panglungsod of component cities and sangguniang bayan. Yan. And the city or municipal mayor naman in the case of sangguniang barangay upon recommendation of the sangguniang barangay concerned. So, yan yung vacancies and succession sa local government units. Number 5, recall. Ano naman ito? Recall. Under the COMELEC rules on recall, the power of recall for loss of confidence shall be exercised by the registered voters of a local government unit to which the local elective official subject to such recall belongs. So ito yung proseso niya. A recall may be initiated by a preparatory recall assembly. So bawat province, city, there shall be a preparatory recall assembly in every province, city, municipality. Yan. Susunod na step, majority of preparatory recall assembly members may convene in session in a public place and initiate a recall proceeding against the elective official of the LGU. Recall of a provincial, city, or municipal official shall be validly initiated through a resolution adopted by a majority of members of the preparatory recall assembly. Yan. It may also be validly initiated. Yon. Yung una, in-initiate siya. It was initiated by the preparatory recall assembly. Pwede rin siyang simulan. It may also be validly initiated upon petition of at least 25% of the total number of registered voters in the local government unit concerned during the election in which the local official sought to be recalled was elected. So, yung dalawang pamamaraan. Through the preparatory recall assembly and through the petition of at least 25% of the total number of registered voters in the local government unit concerned. So, ang pupuntahan nila next na proseso ay election on recall which shall not be later than 30 days from the filing of the resolution or petition. So, kung na-file na yung resolution or petition, not later than 30 days from filing. So, habang naka-file yun, habang nangyayari ang lahat ng ito, the elective officials sought to be recalled shall not be allowed to resign while the recall process is in progress. So next, the recall shall only be effective upon the election and proclamation of the successor. Yeah. No recall shall take place within 1 year from the date of the official's assumption to office or 1 year immediately preceding a regular local election. Yan. Term limits under Section 43 of the Local Government Code. No local elective officials shall serve for more than 3 consecutive terms in the same position. Yan. Ito naman tayo sa letter D. Topic naman natin ay local taxation pa rin, under pa rin ang local government units. So, number 1, fundamental principles of local and real property taxation. So, under the presidential decree enacting a real property tax code, yan, section 2, okay, nung presidential decree enacting a real property tax code, fundamental principles. The appraisal and assessment of real property for taxation purposes shall be guided by the following fundamental principles. Number 1, real property shall be appraised at its current and fair market value. Number 2, the appraisal of real property shall be uniform in each local political subdivision. Number 3, real property shall be classified for assessment purposes on the basis of its actual use. Number 4, real property shall be assessed on the basis of a uniform standard of value within each local political subdivision. Number 5, in no case shall the appraisal and assessment of real property for taxation purposes and the collection of real property tax be let to any private person. And number 6, the goal of property assessment shall be the equitable distribution of the tax burden. Number 2, common limitations on the taxing power of the local government unit. Since the power is not inherent, the local government unit in the exercise of taxing powers must be consistent with the limitations imposed by Congress. Number 3, requirements for a valid tax ordinance. Yan. Under the jurisprudence and the law on procedure for approval and effectivity of tax ordinance and revenue measures. Yan, and under the jurisprudence, the Supreme Court held that local tax ordinances and revenue measures shall be in accordance with the provisions of this code, provided that public hearings shall be conducted for the purpose prior to the enactment thereof, provided further that any questions on the constitutionality or legality of tax ordinance or revenue measures may be raised on appeal within 30 days from the effectivity thereof to the Secretary of Justice, who shall render decision within 60 days from the date of receipt of the appeal. Yun ang procedure for approval and effectivity of tax ordinance. Yan. Requirements for a valid tax ordinance, procedure for approval and effectivity of tax ordinance, kakasabi lang natin. Yung valid tax ordinance na banggit na rin. Pero yan din yan. Ano pa ba? Ito. Number 5, exemptions from real property taxes. So under the local government code, a real property tax in the Philippines is ranging from 1% to 2% of the assessed value of the real property. Assessment of the property is based on a certain percentage of the fair market value of the property depending on the actual use of the property. Exemptions. Sino ba yung mga hindi nagbabayad ng amilyar o ng real property taxes? Number 1, government real properties. Number 2, religious, charitable, and educational institutions. Number 3, local water utilities, machinery, and equipments. Number 4, cooperative. Yan. Under the Cooperative Code of the Philippines. And number 5, for pollution and environmental protection. Yan, yung mga properties na nakalaan para sa pollution and environmental protection, they are exempted from paying real property taxes under Section 206 of the Local Government Code. So magtungo naman tayo sa ating 13th, 1-3, lucky number, national economy and patrimony under the Constitution pa rin to, under the political law. So, ano naman ang Regalian Doctrine? Regalian Doctrine is a legal principle that holds that all natural wealth, agricultural, forest, timber, and mineral lands of the public domain and all other natural resources belong to the state. Under the jurisprudence, the Supreme Court held that under the Regalian Doctrine, all lands not otherwise appearing to be clearly within private ownership are presumed to belong to the state. Hence, a positive act of the government is needed to declassify a forest land into alienable or disposable land for agricultural or other purposes. Letter B, under ng National Economy and Patrimony. Exploration, development, and utilization of natural resources under Article 12 of our Philippine Constitution, Section 1. The goals of the national economy are a more equitable distribution of opportunities, income, and wealth, a sustained increase in the amount of goods and services produced by the nation for the benefit of the people, and then expanding productivity as the key to raising the quality of life for all, especially the underprivileged. The state shall promote industrialization and full employment based on sound agricultural development and agrarian reform through industries that make full and efficient use of human and natural resources and which are competitive in both domestic and foreign markets. However, the state shall protect Filipino enterprises against unfair foreign competition and trade practices. Letter C, franchises, authority, and certificates for public utilities. Section 10 of Article 12 of the Philippine Constitution. Under pa rin ito ng National Economy and Patrimony. Ayan. The Congress, upon recommendation of the Economic and Planning Agency when the national interest dictates, reserve to citizens of the Philippines or to corporations or associations at least 60% of whose capital is owned by such citizens or such higher percentage as Congress may prescribe certain areas of investments. The Congress shall enact measures that will encourage the formation and operation of enterprises whose capital is wholly owned by Filipinos. The grant of rights, privileges, and concessions covering the national economy and patrimony, the state shall give preference to qualified Filipinos. Section 11 ng Article 12, no? No franchise certificate or any other form of authorization for the operation of a public utility shall be granted except to citizens of the Philippines or to corporations or associations organized under the laws of the Philippines, at least 60% of whose capital is owned by such citizens, nor shall such franchise certificate or authorization be exclusive in character or for a longer period than 50 years. Neither shall any such franchise or right be granted except under the condition that it shall be subject to amendment, alteration, or repeal by the Congress when the common good so requires. The state shall encourage equity participation in public utilities by the general public. The participation of foreign investors in the governing body of any public utility enterprise shall be limited to their proportional share in its capital, and all the executive and managing officers of such corporation or association must be citizens of the Philippines. Come on, citizens of the world. Letter D, acquisition, ownership, and transfer of public and private lands. So, dito naman tayo, letter D. Under the Act to amend and compile the laws relative to lands of the public domain and for other purposes, and under the Philippine Constitution, sabi niya, save in cases of hereditary succession, no private land shall be transferred or conveyed except to individuals, corporations, or associations qualified to acquire or hold lands of the public domain. Letter E, practice of professions. Section 14, Article 12. Ayan, tungkol naman sa practice of professions. The sustained development of a reservoir of national talents consisting of Filipino scientists, entrepreneurs, professionals, managers, high-level technical manpower, and skilled workers and craftsmen in all fields shall be promoted by the state. The state shall encourage appropriate technology and regulate its transfer for the national benefit. The practice of all professions in the Philippines shall be limited to Filipino citizens, save in cases prescribed by law. Letter F, under pa rin ito ng National Economy and Patrimony. Letter F, Organization and Regulation of Corporations, Private and Public. Section 16, Article 12 of the Philippine Constitution, sabi niya, the Congress shall not, except by general law, provide for the formation, organization, or regulation of private corporations. Government-owned or controlled corporations may be created or established by special charters in the interest of common good and subject to the test of economic viability. Letter G, monopolies, restraint of trade, and unfair competition. So under section, under Article 12 pa rin. Hindi ko mabasa yung section eh. The state shall regulate or prohibit monopolies when the public interest so requires. No combinations in restraint of trade or unfair competition shall be allowed. Okay, ika-14th topic. Hindi 14th article itong mga 14 ko mga topic under the Constitution. Social justice and human rights. So letter A, concept of social justice. Under the jurisprudence, the Supreme Court held that social justice means the promotion of the welfare of all people, the adoption by the government of measures calculated to ensure economic stability of all the competent elements of society through the maintenance of a proper economic and social equilibrium in the interrelations of the members of the community. Letter B, economic, social, and cultural rights. Under Section 9, Article 2. Yan, Article 2 of the Philippine Constitution, yung Declaration of Principles and State Policies. Sabi niya, the state shall promote a just and dynamic social order that will ensure the prosperity and independence of the nation and free the people from poverty through policies that provide adequate social services, promote full employment, a rising standard of living, and an improved quality of life for all. Section 10 ng Article 2 of the Constitution, sabi niya, the state shall promote social justice in all phases of national development. Section 11 ng Article 2 of the Philippine Constitution, sabi niya naman, the state values the dignity of every human person and guarantees full respect for human rights. So, nabanggit ang human rights. Commission on Human Rights under Section 17, Article 13 ng Philippine Constitution. There is hereby created an independent office called the Commission on Human Rights. It shall be composed of a chairman, may isang chairman, and 4 members, bali 5 sila, who must be natural-born citizens of the Philippines and the majority of whom shall be members of the bar. The approved annual appropriations of the Commission shall be automatically and regularly released. Yan. Section 18, Article 13, Powers and Functions of the Commission on Human Rights. Marami ito, 11. Number 1, investigate on its own or on complaint by any party all forms of human rights violations involving civil and political rights. Civil and political rights, sabi niya. Number 2, adopt its operational guidelines in accordance with the rules of court. Number 3, provide appropriate legal measures for the protection of human rights of all persons within the Philippines, as well as Filipinos residing abroad, and provide for preventive measures and legal aid services to the underprivileged whose human rights have been violated or need protection. Number 4, exercise visitorial powers over jails, prisons, or detention facilities. Number 5, Establish a continuing program of research, education, and information to enhance respect for the primacy of human rights. Number 6, recommend to Congress effective measures to promote human rights and to provide victims compensation. Number 7, monitor the Philippine government's compliance with the international treaty obligations on human rights. Number 8, grant immunity from prosecution to any person whose testimony or whose possession of documents or any other evidence is necessary or convenient to determine the truth in any investigation conducted by it or under its authority. Number 9, request the assistance of any department, bureau, office, or agency in the performance of its functions. Number 10, appoint its officers and employees in accordance with the law. And number 11, perform such other duties and functions as may be provided by law. Okay, topic 15. Ito, amendments or revisions of the Constitution. Yan, Article 17 of the Philippine Constitution. Sabi niya, any amendment to or revision of this Constitution may be proposed by number 1, the Congress upon a vote of 3/4 of all its members. Or number 2, a constitutional convention. Ayan. Number 3, through initiative upon a petition of at least 12% of the total number of registered voters, of which every legislative district must be represented by at least 3% of the registered voters therein. No amendment under this section more than once every 5 years. So pag through initiative, yung petition for at least 12% of the total number of registered voters, no amendment under this section more than once every 5 years. So bali tatlong paraan. Yung una, dalawa, Congress ang gagawa. Congress upon a vote of 3/4 of all its members. At yung pangalawa naman, Constitutional Convention. Itong CONCON na ito must be ratified by a majority of the votes cast in a plebiscite which shall be held not earlier than 60 days nor later than 90 days. So, ito yung constitution ng ito yung gagawa sila ng Constitutional Convention. At ito yon. Paano gawin yon? Yung CONCON? Ito yon. The Congress may, by a vote of 2/3 of all its members, call a Constitutional Convention or by a majority vote of all its members, submit to the electorate the question calling such convention. Yun na nga. Pag pinasa na nila yun sa electorate, it must be ratified by a majority of the votes cast in a plebiscite which shall, ayun na yung binasa natin, which shall be held earlier, not earlier than 60 days, nor later than 90 days. So, ulitin natin para maliwanag. Tatlong pamamaraan ng amendments and revisions of the Constitution. Number 1, the Congress upon a vote of 3/4 of all its members. Or number 2, yung CONCON. The Congress may, by a vote of 2/3 of all its members, or by a majority vote of all its members, submit to the electorate, ira-ratify ng electorate, yon. At yung ikatatlong paraan, yun naman yung initiative, yon, through initiative upon a petition of at least 12% of the total number of registered voters, of which every legislative district must be represented by at least 3% of the registered voters therein. Magtungo na tayo sa topic natin number 16, Education, Science, Technology, and Sports. Ito, academic freedom, letter A, under Article 16. Yan. Article 16 of the Constitution. Academic freedom shall be enjoyed in all institutions of higher learning. Every citizen has a right to select a profession or course of study subject to fair, reasonable, and equitable admission and academic requirements. Letter B, constitutional tax exemptions for certain educational institutions. So under Article 14, Section 4.3 of the Philippine Constitution, all revenue and assets of non-stock, non-profit educational institutions used actually, directly, and exclusively for educational purposes are exempt from taxes and duties. Okay, tuloy-tuloy na tayo. Sabi ko lagi, political and public international law. Eto na, public international law. Okay, concepts. Public international law is the law that governs sovereign nations or states and the law governing the relations between or among sovereign states or nations. Letter B, relationship between international and national law. 3 elements that would identify what separates international law from national law. Una, yung hierarchy. There is no hierarchy between and among states, as accordingly, states are considered equal, independent, and sovereign of each other. No state can control the other, or else it is an intervention of the sovereignty and independence of states. Number 2, consent o yung discretion. Public international law is something consensual or discretionary. No state is obliged to sign or ratify a treaty or be bound by the terms and conditions of an agreement with states of which such state is not a signatory. Number 3, enforcement. We have the national government assigned to do the enforcement and the Congress shall enact the laws. So pag national law kasi, nakatoka yan na ang paggawa ng batas ay sa Kongreso. So, ayon dito sa nakasulat, may problema nga raw sa enforcement ng public international law. Sources of public international law. Number 1, treaties. Treaties are formal and signed documents entered into by states. Treaties are only binding to parties that signed and ratified, so non-signatories cannot be enforced to obey such. Treaties could be multilateral. Ang example ng multilateral treaty ay ang Vienna Convention, at bilateral between 2 states. Yan. At meron ding mga tax treaties. Number 2, na source of public international law, yung customary international law. 2 elements for a customary international law to be binding. Number 1, practice, and yung opinio juris sivi necessitatis, an opinion of law or necessity. Example is immunity of foreign heads of states. Yan. Ano naman ang principle of non-refoulement? Principle of non-refoulement, it means that the states cannot force the return of a person who is in fear of persecution once he is returned to his home state. Kung kaya't may mga bansa kagaya ng Canada na kinukup-kup nila yung mga may nag-a-apply ka ng nakalimutan ka na kung anong immigrant or nakalimutan ka ba siya ina-apply ang refugee status, parang gano'n. Ano naman ang jus cogens? Jus cogens means compelling law. It designates norms from which no derogation is permitted by way of particular agreements. Third source of public international law, general principles of law. Yan. Is the all-encompassing principles of law where there is implicit compliance like the principle of good faith and justice. Ika-4 na source, writing of publicists. So, it is a subsidiary source of international law and the teachings should be of public international law and done by the most highly qualified publicists. Ano naman yung subjects of international law? Ayan. Different entities which possess international personality whose rights, duties, and obligations come under the international law, and these entities have the power to confer these rights, duties, and international obligations through the international claim. So, tatlo yan. There are 3 subjects of international law. Number 1, states are considered as the original and major subject of international law, and their legal personality derived from the international system structure. All states enjoy equal rights and international legal personalities. Number 2, international organizations are an association of different states which are formed with the help of a treaty or agreement between different nations, and its function goes beyond the states and deals with the conflict of nations. At ang ika-3, individuals. Individuals are always the main concern of international law. Dito tayo sa requisites of statehood. Parang topic siya. Ito yung mga topics niya under requisites of statehood. Ano muna yung jurisdiction of states? Ano yung mga basehan, basis of jurisdiction of states? Letter A, the territoriality principle. The jurisdiction of the nation within its own territory is necessarily exclusive and absolute. It is susceptible to no limitation not imposed by itself. Any restriction upon it deriving validity from an external source would imply a diminution of its sovereignty to the same extent in that power which could impose such restriction. All exceptions, therefore, to the full and complete power of a nation within its own territories must be traced up to the consent of the nation itself. They can flow from no other legitimate source. Letter B, nationality principle permits a country to exercise criminal jurisdiction over any of its nationals accused of criminal offenses in another state. Ano muna yung statelessness? Statelessness is someone, o yung stateless, is someone who is not considered as a national by any state under the operation of its law. So 1954 Convention relating to the status of statelessness persons, yun ang definition ng statelessness at sinisikap na mawala yung mga, kumbaga, wala ng taong maging stateless. Yan. Letter C, basis of jurisdiction, yung protective principle. Protective principle is a rule of international law that allows a sovereign state to assert jurisdiction over a person whose conduct outside its boundaries, person whose conduct outside its boundaries threatens the state's security or interferes with the operation of its government functions. So, protective principle, it is a rule of international law that allows a sovereign state to assert jurisdiction over a person whose conduct outside its boundaries threatens the state's security or interferes with the operation of its government functions. Letter D, universality principle provides for a state's jurisdiction over crimes against international law, even when the crimes did not occur on that state's territory and neither the victim nor perpetrator is a national of that state. Letter E, passive personality principle allows states in limited cases to claim jurisdiction to try a foreign national for offenses committed abroad that affect its own citizens. Ano naman yung mga exemptions of jurisdiction? Letter A, state immunity from suit. So, it is a principle by which one state has no right to judge the actions of another by the standards of its national law. It is a principle that is derived from the theory of the sovereign equality of states. Letter B, act of state doctrine is one of the methods by which states prevent their national courts from deciding disputes which relate to the internal affairs of another state, the other two being immunity and non-justiciability. Every sovereign state is bound to respect the independence of every other state, and the courts of one country will not sit in judgment on the acts of the government of another done within its territory. Letter C, ito, under pa rin ng exemptions from jurisdiction, diplomatic immunity is a principle of international law by which certain foreign government officials are not subject to the jurisdiction of local courts and other authorities for both their official and, to a large extent, their personal activities. Letter D, international organizations and its officers. Ito, are derived from the intent of their member states, expressed in constituent treaties or agreements or privileges and immunities with regard to the legal relationship between that organization and its members. The U.S. International Organizations Immunities Act, prescribes that designated international organizations shall enjoy the same immunity from foreign suit and every form of judicial process as is enjoyed by foreign governments. Okay, letter F, general principles of treaty law. The convention defines treaty as a written agreement between states which may be embodied in one or more than one instrument and is governed by international law. Treaties form the basis of international law. They maintain stability and diplomatic relations between states. They are thus the most important element to guarantee international cooperation, peace, and security. Letter G, doctrine of state responsibility is a doctrine that functions as a general law of wrongs that governs when an international obligation is breached, the consequences that flow from a breach, and who is able to invoke those consequences and how. Letter H, refugees. Ano ba ito mga ito? Under international law, refugees are persons outside their countries of origin who are in need of international protection because of a serious threat to their life, physical integrity, or freedom in their country of origin as a result of persecution, armed conflict, violence, or serious public disorder. The need for international protection arises because they are unable to avail themselves of the protection of their own country against these threats. Letter I, extradition. So extradition is the legal process by which a person is transferred from one country to another without the person's consent. Here, a governmental authority formally and legally turns over an alleged criminal to another government for the person to face prosecution for a crime. In international proceedings, treaties generally provide for the presentation to the executive authority of the request state of a requisition or demand for the return of the alleged offender and the designation of the particular officer having authority to act in behalf of the demanding nation. Letter J, basic principles of international human rights law. Under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the basic principles of international human rights law are universality, interdependence and indivisibility, equality and non-discrimination, and that human rights simultaneously entail both rights and obligations from duty bearers and rights owners. Letter K, basic principles of international humanitarian law. Under the customary international law and the Geneva Conventions of 1949, the core fundamental principles of international humanitarian law are, number 1, distinction between civilians and combatants, prohibition to attack those forced de combat, prohibition to inflict unnecessary suffering, the principle of necessity, the principle of proportionality. So, itong mga forced de combat, ito yung mga not directly engaged in hostilities. And you have to treat persons humanely and protect the victims. I wonder, bakit ang daming mga grupo na sinusulong ang human rights pero ang tinitira naman nila sa mga laylayan at rural areas ng Pilipinas ay ang mga horse de combat at ang mga sibilyan. Masyado nang mahaba at ako'y pagod na pero go lang tayo dahil baka kumita tayo. Charot. Magtungo na tayo sa letter L, Law of the Sea. Ito yung United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. UNCLOS. Yan. Number 1, baselines. Under the law of the sea, these baselines drawn between features and coastline to these baselines drawn between features and coastline to created straight lines allow states to create fixed points to deal with the wild distance variances caused by such features. Any sea between the coast and the strait baseline is considered internal waters rather than territorial waters. Number 2, archipelagic state means a state constituted wholly by one or more archipelagos and may include other islands. So, Article 47 ng UNCLOS. Archipelagic baselines. An archipelagic state may draw straight archipelagic baselines joining the outermost points of the outermost islands and drying reefs of the archipelago. Alin sunod dito sa UNCLOS na yung ginawang batas, yung baselines law? Alin sunod sa UNCLOS and sa ating National Territory Provision, yung baselines law na ginawa ni dating Senator Bongbong Marcos nung senator pa siya. Number 3, internal waters. Internal waters are all the waters that fall landward of the baseline, such as lakes, rivers, and tide waters. Number 4, territorial sea. Under the UNCLOS, the territorial sea can be defined as the area which extends up to 12 nautical miles from the baseline of a country's coastal state. It is under the jurisdiction of that particular country. However, foreign ships, both merchant and military, are allowed passage through it. Okay. Contiguous zone. Yan. Contiguous zone can be defined as the belt which extends 12 nautical miles beyond the territorial sea limit. A coastal state's control on this area is limited to prevention of actions which can infringe its customs, fiscal, and immigration laws. Ano naman ang exclusive economic zone? So, meron kasing jurisdiction and sovereignty pa rin ang Philippines sa territorial sea and sa exclusive economic zone. So, under the UNCLOS, the exclusive economic zone is an area beyond and adjacent to the territorial sea. It can extend to a maximum of 200 nautical miles from the baselines within the exclusive economic zone. A coastal state enjoys sovereign rights over its natural resources. Number 7, the continental shelf and extended continental shelf. Under the UNCLOS, the continental shelf is that part of the seabed over which a coastal state exercises sovereign rights with regard to the exploration and exploitation of natural resources, including oil and gas deposits, as well as other minerals and biological resources of the seabed. The legal continental shelf extends out to a distance of 200 nautical miles from its coast, or further if the shelf naturally extends beyond that limit. Yung extended continental shelf naman, where the continental shelf extends beyond 200 nautical miles, a state is required by UNCLOS to make a submission to the Commission on the limits of the continental shelf. So magsasubmit ang isang estado na sumobra siya. Sasubmit siya sa Commission on the limits of the continental shelf, CLCS. This submission sets out the coordinates of the outer limits of the shelf and is accompanied by technical data, NACS data, to support the claim. The Commission assesses, then makes recommendations. The outer limits of the continental shelf established by a coastal state based on these recommendations are final and binding. Letter 8, International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea, ITLOS. It is an independent judicial body established by the Third United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea to adjudicate disputes arising out of the interpretation and application of the Convention. Letter M, Basic Principles of International Environmental Law. Number 1, Sovereignty and Responsibility. Number 2, Precautionary Principle. Number 3, Prevention Principle. Number 4, Polluter Pays Principle. yung nagkakalat siya magbayad. And number 5, sustainable development principle. So, ang pinakamahalaga at popular na principle dito ay yung precautionary principle. Under the principles of international environmental law. Ano ang sinasabi niya rito? Sabi sa precautionary principle, it states that if a product, an action, or a policy has suspected risk of causing harm to the public or to the environment, protective action should be supported before there is complete scientific proof of a risk. So parang sinasabi niya, mas magandang iwasan ang sakit kesa lunasan ito. So doon nagtatapos ang ating pagbabasa ng mga basic principles and provisions of the Constitution, political law, yan, and of our international law. So kung meron mang magbabar na makakarinig nito, I pray na papasa ka. Sama mo rin ako sa prayers mo. At yung mga katulad ko na ordinaryong tao lang na trip-trip lang magbasa, sana marami kayong matutunan. God bless you.